Imagine you heard of a health condition that affected 50% of the children in your neighborhood, making them periodically miss school, totaling up to about 6 weeks of school every year. And imagine that the only way that they could receive the content was by attending class. So one missed day of school means a lost opportunity to learn that information. And imagine that on top of their health situation, they felt a social stigma. And so even though so many children are affected by it, they felt isolated. And they didn't feel like they could justify their absences to their teachers or even talk to their parents or peers about it. Imagine that there is a simple and cheap intervention: menstrual pads. In many communities across the globe, menstruation is one of the leading causes that limits female educational attainment. I first became aware of this when my advisor, Dr. Winnie, told me about the low attendance in the school in her Kenyan hometown. And when I looked at the education statistics, I saw that in lower primary school, male and female education attendance is virtually the same. But as children grow up in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, female attendance goes down a little bit more every year. In this specific community, children frequently walk or run 1 to 3 miles to school every day. Personally, that seems less appealing with cramps. And when they're at school, the lack of water makes it difficult to do some basic hygiene practices. And so it's more manageable to stay home. But when they do stay home, they can't get the education content. There's no textbook to take home, no internet to look up terms. And through the Kenyan school system, as in many other school systems, there's a standardized 8th grade exam that they have to pass, and their score on it influences the quality of high school they get to go to. And so if a girl misses several days of school in 7th and 8th grade, she's less likely to get the opportunity to attend a quality high school, let alone get into college. This is a problem. So I went with my advisor to a rural school in Western Kenya to look into this. And I remember being in front of a group of middle school girls and asking them, is this something that influences your attendance and your education and your grades? And they looked at me and they shook their heads. But when we gave them an anonymous survey, 70% of the girls said it negatively influenced their grades. Now, these are girls that by and large had never used feminine sanitary products. So what did they use? They used leaves, or paper, or old rags. There's a dumpster behind the school, and the children aren't allowed to go to the dumpster. But some female teachers reported that they sometimes see girls sneak off to the dumpster, and they don't reprimand them because they know they're going to get paper to help stay in school. Now, sometimes when they use rags, these rags, they don't know how to properly sanitize and dry them. And if they're not properly sanitized, they can breed bad bacteria, which can harm these girls and further push their stigma and decrease their well-being. And so not only is there a health problem, but there's a social stigma problem. We asked these girls, and 60% of them reported feeling very embarrassed when they were on their period. Another 36% reported feeling shy or embarrassed. And we wonder if the other 4% just hadn't had their period yet. This is a problem. Girls reported feeling embarrassed about that someone would find out, or being afraid that they would have a public leak. We asked the girls to write down any questions that they had about puberty, and a lot of their questions sounded something like this. What disease is causing this? How can I protect myself? Why do I feel pain? Now, you and I know that menstruation isn't a disease, and I hope that the pain that they're referring to is normal menstrual cramps. And even then, pain, if you don't know what is causing it, can be very scary. But the reality is that if these girls are not getting proper sanitary practices, then they are very vulnerable to infections, and their pain might not be normal. We need to protect these girls, but many teachers and parents are silent on the issue because they have never received the education themselves, so it's unrealistic to expect them to have the vocabulary and the education to talk about this issue in a healthy way. As many as as few as 15% of Kenyan adolescents have reported talking to their parents about puberty. And in our study, although 94% of the students had questions about puberty, less than half felt comfortable talking to any family member about it. So, how can we do this? How can we get this word out and talk about this in a healthy way if you don't even have the vocabulary to start talking about it? Well, we decided to... This is an overwhelming problem, and I didn't know where to start. And so after initially talking to my advisor about it, I went home and I did what most people have done. I Googled it. And I found a few organizations with similar missions that had been doing projects on this, and I downloaded a pattern to sew a cloth pad, because we thought if we could give them a sustainable solution, then maybe this could work. And I remember sewing a funny-looking one, I don't sew, out of an old t-shirt of mine. And my husband came home from work that day and saw my final product just lying on the coffee table, and he said, "Could you please put that somewhere else?" Fair enough. But we thought that if we could make several of these, we could give a sustainable solution. And a sustainable solution is very important because we could raise a lot of money and give several girls hundreds of disposable pads. But 6 months later, they'd be right where they started, or worse. I spoke to a Kenyan principal who had to deal with an issue with one of her boarding school students who had had several disposable pads, but when they were gone, she didn't know what to use, and she didn't know how to talk to anybody. And so she kept them, hoping to reuse them next month. I imagine that makes you uncomfortable. It makes me very uncomfortable, but not nearly as uncomfortable as the girl herself. So this is a problem, but it doesn't have to be an overwhelming problem. We know the solution. And we thought, even though I don't sew, we thought that we could make these in some way. And I have a really good community around me. And I sent 2 emails, and those emails got passed around, and a couple of churches and groups of women adopted the project and posted pad parties. And it was at one of these parties that I actually learned how to sew. I remember being at one of the churches, and the pastor was walking around making sure that everybody had enough food and enough materials and they were comfortable. And later his wife approached me and told me that in the evenings, when everything settles down, he pulls out his sewing machine and continues to sew these items for girls that he'll never meet. And so I ended up I was hoping maybe I could scrap together 100 to take. I took over 800. They found their way to my office at home, and I vacuum sealed all of them and took them with me. And I remember we held an assembly for girls from 2 schools, and I sat, and as I watched Kenyan women go to the front of the classroom and talk to the girls about their changing bodies, and it was beautiful to watch. But then it was my turn, and I went up to the front of the classroom, and I remember all of their eyes locked on me, the only one that didn't look like she belonged there. And I felt so self-conscious when they chuckled at my accent. But I was there to tell them from firsthand experience how to use and sanitize their pads. And it was a very vulnerable and one of the most human experiences I have ever felt. Every girl that day got 4 pads. I have a few pictures. Could you put them up, please? Every girl that day got 4 pads and a bag that they could reuse. Just circle through 4 pictures. And that's my favorite picture, actually, because it's a candid shot that after they got it, they were kind of peeking at them. And we taught them how to use and sanitize it in a healthy way so that they could keep going to school. And that day, over half of the girls reported feeling comfortable talking to their teachers about puberty. And this is a really big deal. And 94% of them said that this would help with their education attendance. And since then, we've heard from the school, and they've said that female attendance is, in fact, up this year. Now, I know that myths are not dispelled overnight, and I don't mean to give an overly simplistic view of what needs to happen. But There are really complex problems in the world, problems without a clear solution, problems that are so overwhelming that you don't know where to start. But this isn't one of them. I don't mean to say it's easy, but its simplicity is empowering. It takes a village to raise a child, but in this globalized society, the village can be global. So the volunteers in Indiana and in Michigan are helping to contribute to the education of these girls in this community that they will never meet, but they have helped and empowered in some small way. Now, when I found out that I'd be able to be here and talk about this topic, I was so excited, and then I got immediately terrified, and I thought, I'm gonna be pad girl. And then I freaked out, and I thought, I can't do this. Then I thought, no, this isn't about pads. It's about education. It's about dignity. It's about equality, and blah, 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 blah. It's about pads. And so I thought that every good presentation has a powerful visual aid, and the really meaningful presentations allow the audience to meaningful it, but we're not going to do that. I just say that so that you'll be less nervous when I pull out my items. This is an example that a volunteer made for us, and it's the only one we didn't donate. And since we really want this to be a sustainable solution, we took this one to a textile company in Kenya who made this one from local materials. And we're still trying to figure out how it can be sustainable and made locally and still be donated to the girls who need it the most. So more is yet to come on this topic. But I bring these here, not just because I want it to be more memorable, but because education and academia is often accused of being overly abstract. And as I stand in front of people that I've never met before, holding feminine cloth pads, I realize how attractive it is to be abstract, because it is so much easier for me to stand here and talk about the abstract values of dignity and education and equality, and it's so much harder for me to stand in front of you and show you a sustainable, tangible solution. Academia is also accused of over-dissecting problems. And so we say, this is a family issue, this is a political topic, this is a psychological problem, this is a women's issue. When in reality, it's just a problem. And when we step away from practical interdisciplinary areas, nothing happens. This cannot be an education problem or a women's issue. If it does, the solution will never reach its full potential. It can help, but it will never reach its full potential. When I was in Kenya, I spoke to a few men about why I was there. And generally, I was so vague to just spare both of us from having that conversation. For example, have you ever felt like you had something embarrassing in your luggage when you went through customs? Try 800 cloth pads in your luggage going alone through customs. That was an experience I never wanted to repeat again. So I was generally very vague about why I was there. But the few men that I did speak to about the subject, I was surprised at their openness. And they even volunteered some stories about their female peers in school growing up. And they resonated with the need that we spoke of. And soon I felt ashamed for automatically removing them from the conversation. This is an issue that affected their mothers, their peers, their friends, their wives, their daughters, the mother of their children. It's misrepresentative to call it a women's issue, because every additional year of schooling that a girl has increases her income by 10 to 20%, adding $3.2 billion to the Kenyan economy. Not to mention that well-educated mothers contribute to the health and education of her children, both sons and daughters. It's misrepresentative to call it a women's issue. Now, I'd like to conclude by making a few remarks about what I've learned about the definition of peace through this project. Because we live in a globalized society where the news is very quick and very graphic, and so it's tempting to define peace as the absence of a physical threat, because we're always hearing about violence and rumors of war. But when we define peace that way, we are neglecting the importance of basic human rights. Because in a society where there is shame, when there is inequality in education, when girls are increasingly marginalized as they grow up, when there's not adequate information on health and education, in that situation, there is no peace. And so promotion of peace is the active dissolution of barriers to basic human rights. We need to help these women, and we need to help society, because it's not a women's issue when it affects the whole society. Women who see their relationships and their bodies in a healthy way contribute to the health and education of the whole community. And so a culture of silence on certain topics influences the whole community. This project isn't about reproductive health, but it's about being able to see some of the most invisible children around the world and giving them the tools to fight for their education, their inalienable human right. Thank you very much.